Welcome everyone to Whimsy Woven Stories. Here, we explore gripping tales of real-life twists. Join our storytelling community.
The room smelled like wealth. That was the first thing I noticed stepping into the Grant family's penthouse dining room. A blend of imported wood polish, vintage wine, and quiet entitlement. The table, a polished mahogany stretched longer than some apartments, gleamed beneath a chandelier that flickered like it was competing for attention. Everything and everyone was curated. 12 seats, 11 filled with tailored suits, perfected smiles and inherited arrogance. I was the 12th, the outsider. I took my seat quietly as always, and offered a polite smile to my wife, Clara. She looked stunning in an ivory satin dress, diamond earrings catching every bit of light. She didn't look at me. At the far end sat her brother Mason, already into his second glass of wine, radiating the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no. Across from him, their mother Lorraine dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, eyes sharp and unreadable. And at the head of the table sat Charles Grant, the man who once shook my hand like I was a charity case. He raised his glass. "To family," he said. "To family," they echoed. I nodded, said nothing and reached for my water. Dinner began as it always did. Fake interest, compliments with a sting. Mason asked if I was still doing the computer thing. Lorraine wondered if I'd found a job that paid in something more tangible than hope. Clara stayed silent. She didn't have to. Appetizers came, foie gras, quail egg, something with truffle I couldn't pronounce. I chewed slowly. I'd already guessed this wasn't just a dinner. When you live quiet, you learn to listen. Charles tapped his glass. "Before we move on, we've prepared a little something. Just a bit of fun. A family tradition." He winked like I was in on the joke. Music hummed from hidden speakers. Lights dimmed. A screen lowered behind me, massive, professional, calculated. Then the words appeared. Failed son-in-law. Unemployed. Disappointment. Deadbeat. Reject. Laughter broke out. Mason wheezed between chuckles. Careful, he might cry. Clara smirked, raised her glass and took a slow sip, like it was a toast to her upgraded life. Our eyes met, hers empty. Lorraine turned to me, her smile flawless. "Just a joke, darling." Charles laughed that deep, entitled laugh. "All in good fun, son. You know we love having you." I looked at the screen again. Someone had spent real money to humiliate me. Probably weeks of planning. All that effort, interesting. I placed my napkin on the table and stood. No shouting. No drama. "Joke's over," I said. They hesitated. Some still laughed, thinking I'd play along. I reached into my jacket, pulled out my phone and opened a folder labeled Evening. My thumb hovered. I looked up. "One word," I said. "Play." Laughter stopped. The screen flickered. The slideshow vanished. New text appeared. "Welcome to the real Grant family." Charles blinked. "What's this?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The video began. Footage of Mason at a rooftop bar, clearly drunk, boasting to a group of investors. "I don't care if it's illegal. The inside scoop's coming from zoning. They'll approve the land switch," Charles promised. "We dump the stock next quarter. Clean house." Gasps echoed. Lorraine dropped her fork. Charles stood. "Turn that off." I raised a hand, calm. "You can try." He stepped toward the wall panel. Nothing happened. I disabled it hours ago. The screen shifted. Clara in a spa room. Her voice played, clear and cold. "He's sweet, but honestly, he's just convenient. Keeps my taxes clean. Helps me focus on the real stuff." Laughter followed, hers and her friends. "Sometimes I forget he's even there. He blends into the furniture." Silence. I didn't move. Just watched. Clara's eyes were wide now, drained of color. Her hand trembled as she reached for her glass, then set it down. Charles, red with rage, shouted, "You're finished. This is treason." I offered a faint smile. "No, Charles. This is accountability." The footage continued. Tax records. Emails. Call logs. Every deal. Every threat. Every complaint buried by money and manipulation. Then Lorraine's voice from a hidden mic. "Divert the donation. Use the education wing. Nobody checks those books." Still I didn't gloat. They had turned my life into a punchline. I returned the favor, with truth. The screen faded to black. To be continued in court. The lights came back on. The room was still. I glanced at Clara. "You once said I wasn't built for the spotlight," I said. Her mouth opened, but no words came. I slipped the phone into my pocket. Turns out I just needed to make sure it was worth stepping into. I turned and walked away. Behind me, silence. They always called me lucky. Lucky Clara picked me. Lucky Charles let me near his world. Lucky to be part of their dynasty. But every time they said it, they weren't admiring me. They were reminding me, "You don't belong." They saw me as the outsider. The man who married up. Who should be thankful. But I wasn't lucky. I was patient. I kept my mouth shut not because I was weak, but because I was watching. In rooms like theirs, silence rattles louder than noise. Speak too soon and they laugh. Stay quiet long enough and they squirm. That's when the cracks appear. I met Clara at 27. She was poised, magnetic, untouched by failure. I was knee-deep in building a financial behavior tracking platform, using offshore leaks, public data, and hidden corporate proxies. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. Dangerous in the right hands. Clara didn't fully understand it, but she saw potential. Liked that I had ambition without needing the spotlight. "You're quietly powerful," she whispered once, head on my chest. I believed her. She introduced me to her family months later. That's when I saw the Grants for who they were, smiles like knives, praise with venom. They tested people like dogs, just to see how much pain they'd take before snapping. My first test came early. Charles invited me to a casual fundraiser. I wore a blazer and tie. Everyone else wore tuxedos. I was the punchline before dessert. "Oh, he's modest," Lorraine had said, waving her hand. "It's endearing. A little humble background flair." I smiled. I always smiled. But something changed in me that night. I understood. I wasn't meant to fit in. I was meant to stay grateful. Small. Forgettable. So I played my part. By day I built. Quiet meetings. Late night code. Behind closed doors, Clara vented about her mother, about being the face of a legacy. I listened. I never interrupted. She didn't know I'd secured foreign seed funding. Signed NDAs with military contractors. Licensed tech to international regulators tracking dark money. Why would she? She never asked. The more time passed, the more she treated me like decor, present but irrelevant. She started going to events alone. "It's just business," she'd say. "You wouldn't enjoy it." And when I offered to come, "You don't have to prove anything. Just relax." But what she meant was clear. You don't belong in those rooms. One night, I overheard Clara on the phone with Mason. She didn't know I was in the study, headphones off, working late. Her voice floated in from the hallway. "I don't care if he's quiet. He's boring. Not even in the same league, but he's useful. Keeps my taxes clean. Dad likes that he's harmless." I didn't react. Just took a breath and saved a new file in a hidden folder labeled Observations. From then on, I started logging everything, not just conversations but behavior patterns. Clara never noticed how often she repeated herself when lying. Her mother did it too. Mason reused passcodes for years. Charles kept a burner phone in his office, third drawer from the top. I never touched it, just mirrored the data. I wasn't chasing revenge. Not then. I wanted understanding. Over the years my company grew, quietly. My name was buried under layers of shell entities. I had spokespeople, lawyers, proxies. I didn't want fame, I wanted protection. Clara never questioned why I stopped checking her calendar or why I no longer cared when she skipped anniversaries. She assumed I had accepted my role, the obedient houseplant. But I wasn't wilting. I was growing roots. About 2 years ago it all clicked. It was Clara's birthday at her parents' beach house. Everyone was tanned, tipsy, and dripping in generational wealth. Lorraine brought out a photo album. Clara's childhood, vacations, debutante balls. Toward the end there was a wedding photo of us. My face scribbled out in red ink. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. That was my final performance. That night, I walked alone to the shoreline, not thinking about escape, but exposure. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted a mirror. I wanted them to see themselves clearly for the first time. I called Turner, my old MIT roommate, now in cybersecurity, contracting with agencies that use initials. We met for drinks. I told him everything. He didn't even blink. "About time," he said. "Let's burn it down." Took months. I didn't just want cruel words, I wanted hard evidence. Legally damning, ethically undeniable. Financial misconduct. Charitable fraud. Insider trading. Land swaps with forged signatures. All of it cataloged. Every insult they threw at me had been projection. And Clara? She wasn't the worst for lying. She was the worst because she believed her lies. That's why I smiled at dinner, when the slideshow played and son-in-law appeared in bold letters. They still saw the man in the corner. But he was gone. They had forged something else, something sharper, colder, and far more dangerous. Their ridicule gave me purpose. Their arrogance gave me opportunity. And the best part? They gave me the spotlight. I just chose the script. You know what people never admit? That wealth is performance. The Grants were masters of that. Charles Grant, the iron-fisted real estate mogul who built an empire on cheap labor and cutthroat deals. Lorraine, former beauty queen turned philanthropist, writing checks with one hand while burying enemies with the other. Mason, the golden boy, drunk on entitlement, given power like party favors. And Clara, Harvard-polished, magazine-featured, Boston's darling. Flawless on paper. They weren't a family. They were a cast. Everything timed, staged, rehearsed. They smiled for the cameras while pulling permits that bulldozed communities. I was the flaw in their perfect portrait, the smudge they tried to paint over. Charles made it obvious. Always greeted me with that tight-lipped smile, hand outstretched like a chore. Called me pal, champ, son, the way people call waiters boss. Every interaction was performative. Every word rehearsed. I was never one of them. But they never realized I wasn't trying to be. Lorraine was subtler. She'd compliment my tie, then casually mention how refreshing it was that Clara didn't marry someone from her circle, like ambition had skipped a generation. At events, she'd introduce me with qualifiers. This is my son-in-law. He's very sweet. Sweet. Not brilliant. Not accomplished. Sweet, like a house-trained pet. Mason was cruel in a different way. If Charles was the king and Lorraine the queen, Mason was the trust-funded jester. He drank too much, flirted with everything that moved, and never missed a jab. "Hey, computer guy," he'd shout even after I gifted him a signed bottle of Macallan. "Fix my Wi-Fi, will you?" Everyone laughed. I smiled. Clara stayed quiet. Sometimes she'd squeeze my hand when it got obvious, like comforting a child on the verge of tears. She was always caught between two roles, supportive wife and loyal daughter. The latter always won. But I remember Christmas 3 years ago. The family gala was extravagant. Ice sculptures, orchestras, imported cuisine. Clara wore a backless silver gown, beaming like her life had been scripted. I stayed near the bar, shaking hands with people who assumed I worked there. After dessert, Lorraine started handing out personalized gifts. A new tradition. Mason got a vintage Rolex. Charles received a custom bust. Clara unwrapped a diamond bracelet. Then Lorraine turned to me. "We didn't forget you, sweetheart," she said, smiling. She handed me a black velvet box, too big for jewelry. Inside was a framed photo of Clara alone from our wedding. The caption engraved beneath read, "She could have done better." They laughed. Even Clara chuckled nervously. "Mom," I managed. I smiled. My grip tightened on the frame. Later, I sat alone on the balcony, the wind biting the frame beside my scotch. Something broke in me, not because they humiliated me. That had happened too often to sting. What broke was the illusion that they'd ever stop. I could build an empire, cure a disease, and I'd still be the guy who married up. It wasn't just about belittling me, they needed to define me. So I started collecting. Every toast I wasn't included in. Every email Clara forgot to delete. Every snide comment, every whispered deal Mason bragged about when drunk. I became the archivist of their arrogance. At first it felt petty. Then I saw the patterns. Bribery disguised as donations. Foundation money rerouted offshore. Internships Mason traded for attention. Clara's quiet dealings with her father's legal team, rewriting our prenup to favor her if I ever earned real wealth. That's when I understood. This wasn't about jokes. It was about power. And I had married into something dangerous. People like the Grants believe they're untouchable because for so long they were. They throw galas with senators, play tennis with judges, fund both sides of elections. No matter who wins, they get the victory photo. They don't fear consequences because they've never seen one stick. Until now. This wasn't revenge. I wasn't driven by bitterness. I wanted to end the cycle, to crack the polished glass and show the rust beneath. So I kept smiling. I didn't flinch when they mocked me, didn't react at the slideshow dinner, because I knew what they didn't. The curtain was about to fall. They thought they were performing. But I was writing the final act. And the audience? I made sure it was wide. Reporters, investigators, quiet enemies waiting for them to stumble. Clara once said I was too slow to rise. She didn't know I was building something deeper than she could see. Golden families look perfect from a distance. Up close, it's just gold leaf over rot. And I was done pretending. Then came the invitation, midweek, subject line, formal family dinner, celebrate with us. Sent by Clara, polished like a press release. Celebrate with us. From a woman who hadn't kissed me good morning in months. Who kept separate bank accounts, calendars, and, I suspected, a separate life. It wasn't spontaneous. It was bait. Polite bait. The last line read, "No surprises. Be your best self." That was the part that made me laugh. Because with the Grants, nothing was ever just dinner. Every word, every RSVP delay, every smile, calculated. And this time they weren't the only ones pulling strings. They wanted a performance, and cast me as the punchline. I accepted without hesitation. Wouldn't miss it for the world, I said. But I wasn't the only one preparing. 3 days before the dinner, I met Turner in a quiet Korean spot downtown. No suits. Just jeans, hoodies, and a look in his eye that told me he already knew what I was planning to do. Turner had spent the last 6 months embedding tracking codes deep in the digital shadows left behind by the Grants. Mason's texts, Clara's emails, Lorraine's server logs, Charles's real estate transactions. Nothing was off limits. Not when you know where to look. That's the thing about power, it breeds laziness. They think deleting a message makes it disappear. They trust closed doors and whispered secrets. But truth doesn't die. It leaves trails, digital ones. And I had every one of theirs. Cataloged. Time-stamped. Backed up 3 ways. The folder was labeled, The Truth About the Grant Family. 2 days out, I drove to a near-abandoned office park at the city's edge. Inside a secure server Turner controlled, we uploaded everything. Password locked. Scheduled for release. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. At 93% uploaded, I sent out the message, 2 major reporters, anonymous tip, timestamp to hit 10 minutes after dinner began. This wasn't revenge. It was a controlled demolition. Back home, Clara floated through the condo like she hadn't already signed my death warrant. She was smiling again for the first time in months. Like watching me squirm at that table was the real gift. She even bought me a new shirt. Wear this Friday, she said, laying it gently on the bed. Charcoal gray. Tailored. Expensive. You want me to look sharp? I asked. She smiled, but her eyes were cold. You're part of the family. Look the part. That line stuck with me. Look the part. That's all I'd ever done. Play the grateful outsider, the quiet husband. Smile at the jokes. Pour the wine. Laugh when prompted. But this time I wasn't the joke. This time I was the mirror. The night of the dinner, I shaved carefully. Trimmed my beard just enough. Slipped into the shirt she chose. It fit like it was made by someone who thought image was everything. At 7 p.m. sharp, we entered the penthouse. Everything shimmered gold. The table was flawless. Clara's parents posed for photos near the fireplace. Mason stood off to the side, bourbon in hand, smirking. He whispered something to Clara and she laughed, her hand brushing his arm. They were all in on it. All but me, or so they thought. Dinner started slow. Lorraine complimented Clara's dress. Charles boasted about his owning win. I played my part. Small talk. Polite nods. Pass the potatoes. They were softening me up, thinking I'd never see the blade coming. Then just after appetizers, Charles tapped his glass. My dear family, he grinned. Tonight, we celebrate more than another quarter of dominance. We celebrate the bond that makes it possible. He gestured upward. The lights dimmed. A screen dropped from the ceiling. Eyes sparkled. Clara's smile sharpened. Mason sipped with delight. And then it started. Failed son-in-law. Unemployed. Disappointment. Deadbeat. Reject. Laughter erupted. Mason nearly choked. Clara leaned in. Just a little joke, darling. Charles bellowed. It's all in good fun, son. That's when I stood. Reached into my jacket. Pulled out my phone. 1 tap. I looked at them all. Come. Steady. Joke's over. Then I said just 1 word. Play. At first, confusion. Not silence yet. Just the slow unwinding of arrogance. I shifted. The slideshow vanished. A black screen. Then white text appeared. Welcome to the real Grant family. It hit like a wine glass shattering on marble. Forks hovered midair. Chews unfinished. Faces pale. Then Mason's voice. Crisp clear. Hidden phone footage from a rooftop bar. So yeah, I've got the inside numbers on the Wilcraftoft zoning deal, he says, swirling his drink. Charles guarantees the permits pass. We move quick, we double by Q2. And that was just the beginning. One of his friends laughed and said, Isn't that illegal? Mason just grinned. Not when you own the people who write the rules. Gasps fluttered across the table. Charles dropped his knife with a sharp clatter. Lorraine sat bolt upright. Clara's eyes flicked between the screen and me, trying to calculate just how bad things were about to get. They had no idea. Not yet. The second video began. The setting was calmer now, a spa room with soft lighting. Clara's voice came first. I mean, look, he's sweet, but he's basically invisible. A second woman laughed, probably a friend, the type who called everything iconic. Clara kept going, unaware she was being recorded. He's a good tax write-off. Quiet. Loyal. Boring. I can't build a power couple image with him, but at least I get balance, you know? Then came the gut punch. Honestly, he's like a lamp. Fills the room, doesn't do much. More laughter, but not from the dining room. Charles pushed back his chair. Turn it off, he barked. I don't know what kind of stunt this is. I raised a hand. The screen paused. No one's turning anything off, I said evenly. This isn't running from here. It's streaming from a remote encrypted server. Shut it down and it just plays elsewhere. Try blocking it and it auto-uploads to the Boston Globe and every boardroom Charles Grant ever stepped into. Charles swallowed that bitter truth like poison. Mason stood abruptly. This is illegal, he said, voice cracking. You're recording private conversations. That's entrapment. I nodded slowly. Unless you're bragging about crimes in public spaces. Or if one party gives consent. Or if the company you're boasting in front of happens to be mine. Disbelief. Panic. The third video began, a slideshow of transaction records, fake charitable filings, off-the-books expenses. Lorraine's name appeared line after line. Her voice followed, lifted from a dinner party, funneled through the children's literacy wing. Nobody audits the kids. The screen faded briefly, then came a crisp voiceover, Turner's AI overlay designed for clarity. According to financial records, over $3.1 million was funneled through Lorraine Grant's education fund and redirected to shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, linked to Mason Grant's personal accounts. Lorraine stood. She looked like someone had reached inside her and turned her soul cold. This is a hit job, she whispered. No, I said. This is evidence. Organized. Documented. Undeniable. Clara hadn't said a word since the spa footage. Her face was pale. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, maybe looking for an escape, but she didn't move. She couldn't. The next clip played. A phone call between Clara and Charles 2 weeks earlier, intercepted through an unsecured router in their Martha's Vineyard estate. Clara, we need to find a way to freeze him out. Get him to sign a new prenup. If he resists, we pull the mental health card. Charles, I'm already laying the groundwork. He's been distant. I'll start planting that he's unstable. Quiet guys always make the best villains in court. That line pulled the oxygen from the room. I looked at Clara, no rage, just clarity. I never raised my voice at you, I said quietly. Never cursed you, never disrespected your family. Even when they treated me like a ghost. And still, you planned to destroy me, because I didn't entertain your dinner parties. Clara blinked rapidly like she could blink it all away. But it was too late. The screen went dark. End of part 1. Stay tuned. Silence. Not stunned silence, shattered silence. The kind that sits in your chest like a storm front. I pulled a slim black envelope from my pocket and placed it in the center of the table. This contains affidavits from 3 former Grant Holdings employees, testimonies of harassment, financial fraud, and intimidation. It's already been filed with regulators. I turned to Charles. There's a reason 3 journalists were waiting outside. You'll be holding a press conference, but not the kind you're used to. Then to Lorraine. Your foundation's license is already under review. Expect a full audit in 72 hours. Get a real lawyer, not the PR-friendly one. Finally, Clara. I filed for divorce this morning. The documents are clean, final, and sealed, with enough leverage to keep you from contesting it. Unless you want your private messages leaked to every board you serve on. Clara opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her hands trembled. I took a breath and looked at each of them. Let this be the moment you remember, even quiet men have limits. You tried to erase me, humiliate me, redefine me. I tucked the envelope under my arm. But the truth? I smiled faintly. You were the ones performing. And now the world gets to watch. I turned and walked slowly toward the wide oak doors. No one followed. No one spoke. They just stared, at the screen, and at the man they once believed too harmless to matter. I've seen fear before, in negotiations, in boardrooms, in moments of desperation. But never like this. This fear didn't scream. It didn't run. It just sat there, heavy and cold, pressing down on the room like gravity. Charles was still standing, hand braced on the table, knuckles white. For a man who built empires on intimidation, he looked painfully small. Lorraine's posture remained perfect, but her clenched jaw betrayed her. And Clara. Clara hadn't moved since the word divorce. Her face was stuck between disbelief and devastation, like she couldn't process what just happened. You'll regret this, she finally said, barely a whisper. Less threat, more defeat. I turned to her. I think, I said, you already do. She blinked. I saw the war behind her eyes, the calculations, the scramble. Clara was manipulative, yes, but not stupid. She was raised to always have the upper hand. Now she was in a room where every card had been played, and none of them were hers. Charles tried to recover, straightening his jacket. This is extortion. You've broken privacy laws, violated every principle of decency. I cut him off. I followed every federal and state regulation related to the collection and disclosure of public interest information, I said calmly. Challenge it if you want, but be ready for discovery. For subpoenas covering the last 20 years of Grant Holdings' finances. His mouth opened then closed again. Behind me I sensed movement. A young man clearing glasses caught my eye. He gave the smallest nod and went back to work. Lucas, Turner's intern. Embedded 2 weeks ago through the catering service. Quiet. Sure. Watching everything. I wasn't alone in this. And that, I think, is what truly shook them. It wasn't just exposure, it was being outmaneuvered. Clara once said I was too nice to be dangerous. Whispered it in bed after a gala, when I refused to humiliate Mason's ex in front of reporters. You're sweet, she said. Not built for war. She never understood. I didn't avoid war because I feared it. I avoided it because I wanted to win. And winning takes patience. The cracks were finally showing. Charles lunged toward the wall and slammed a button, trying to activate the screen's control panel. Nothing responded. Lorraine pulled out her phone, maybe to call her lawyer, but the signal jammer Turner installed was still active. They were sealed in, soundproof, signal blocked. A family dinner, they called it. I called it a reckoning. You've made your point, Mason muttered, voice trembling. I looked at him. Gone was the smug man who once joked I had the spine of a fern. His hair was disheveled, collar askew, and his once steady hands now shook by his sides. I haven't made anything, I said. This isn't performance art, Mason. This is the opening act. The hard drives were in federal custody. The SEC was reviewing the Will Craftoft case. The city's ethics board had his bribery confession, and the Boston Globe had a press package queued for midnight. He staggered back. You think this makes you better than us? Lorraine hissed. No, I replied. It just means I'm done pretending you ever were better than me. She stood, posture rigid like forged steel. We gave you everything. You gave me humiliation, I said quietly. You reminded me again and again that I wasn't enough for your daughter. That my seat at this table was a gift. That I should be grateful for your scraps. I let that sit for a moment. But here's what you never realized, your arrogance was a map. You flaunted your weaknesses. Laughed too loud. Bragged too often. Mocked too freely. You handed me everything I needed. Clara finally rose, her voice barely a whisper. You really hate me. That made me pause. I turned and looked into her eyes. What I felt wasn't hate. It was colder. Older. Like dust on a long-locked door. No, I said. That would mean I still cared. She flinched. I didn't feel anything. Silence fell again, taut, suffocating, until Charles spoke, trying for diplomacy. What do you want? I smiled, but there was no kindness in it. Nothing. Not a cent. Not a house. Not your daughter. This isn't blackmail. It's exposure. The truth doesn't bargain. It just insists on being seen. Charles nodded slowly, realization dawning. There was no deal left to make. I turned to the door. Then paused. By the way, I added, the footage you saw tonight? That was just part one. Charles stiffened. There's more? Mason asked. I shrugged. If I were you, I'd start apologizing, while it's still an option. No one stopped me. Lucas stepped aside, silver tray in hand. They never saw it coming, he murmured. No, I replied, pulling the door open. Because they never thought I was watching. I stepped into the hallway, leaving the Golden family behind to crack, shatter, and crumble. Silence is strange. People think it's calming. Serene. But that kind only exists in yoga studios and country retreats. What followed wasn't peace, it was the silence that comes after detonation. A sharp, humming void that makes your skin itch. I didn't go far. Just to the elevator, where cold glass met polished marble and the Boston skyline stretched into the night. I stood still, breathing it in. Behind me they sat frozen, unraveling. 2 minutes later, the first voice rose, Charles barking orders like the room still obeyed him. Lorraine yelling for their PR firm. Mason swearing, blaming Clara. And Clara? She was silent. Thinking. Calculating. Silence had always been her weapon. But I'd already turned it against her. The elevator arrived. I stepped in. My reflection in the panel stared back, calm, composed, but behind the eyes something final had settled. I rode down slowly, skipping the express. I wanted the seconds. The space between storms. At the lobby, everything had shifted. The polished stone was now a stage. 2 black SUVs waited at the curb. One carried agents from the State Ethics Commission. A couple of journalists lingered near the security desk. They hadn't spotted me. That was fine. I walked out like any man leaving a late dinner. No guards. No cuffs. I was never the one on trial. Across the street I slipped into a black car. Lucas was already in the driver's seat. Through the rearview mirror we watched the unraveling. Mason had knocked over a chair. Charles paced, phone in hand, shouting. Lorraine sat like stone, decades of poise crushed under reality's weight. And Clara? Clara sat alone, eyes fixed on an untouched wine glass. Her lips were still, shoulders composed, but her eyes gave her away, wide, red-rimmed. Not from crying. From being outplayed. Turner's voice crackled through the speaker. Press releases are live. Channel 6 just aired the Wilk tape. Grant Holdings is down 7 points. Keep it running, I said. Record everything. Lucas pulled away. I didn't look back. This wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. People used to ask why I stayed quiet so long. Why I let them diminish me. The truth? I wasn't silent to survive. I was watching. Building. Learning who they really were when they thought no one noticed. The next morning the fallout hit. Headlines. Viral videos. Boston elite exposed. Insider trading. Embezzlement. Corruption. By noon, Charles's company was under audit. Lorraine's foundation had its non-profit status frozen. Mason's accounts were locked. Clara was dropped from every board she sat on. They scrambled, lawyers, statements, denial. But the cracks were too deep. By nightfall, Clara's face was everywhere. Not for beauty, but as the face of a lie. She didn't reach out. Not that day. 2 days later in my new apartment. Simple, second floor, no marble, but finally mine, I got the message. Clara, can we talk? I stared at it for a long time. She wasn't apologizing. Just testing the door, hoping I was still on the other side. Hoping I was still the man who excused her cruelty, who laughed when she mocked me. But that man didn't live here anymore. I set the phone face down and didn't respond. Rain began falling outside, soft, cleansing. I stood at the window watching droplets carve paths down the glass. The story wasn't ending with a scream or explosion, but with silence. The kind that follows when something breaks beyond repair. They say every empire collapses from within long before the world sees the rubble. That's exactly what was happening to the Grants, slowly then all at once. And I wasn't done yet. I gave them space. Not out of mercy, but precision. Let them flail. Let them try to plug the leaks with charm and damage control. Charles released a pre-recorded statement calling the exposé a malicious smear by a disgruntled ex-employee. Mason posted an Instagram story from the gym, as if muscle could erase felonies. Lorraine went dark, probably too busy erasing years of fake receipts. And Clara? She vanished from public view. But not from mine. I was still watching. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to see how she moved when the masks were gone. She never messaged again. Never begged. Never called. Because she still believed she had a card to play. So I decided to flip the table. The next morning I had the divorce papers delivered. No warning, just a knock on the door of her temporary downtown apartment. Turner's team timed it perfectly, midway through a live-streamed interview with a journalist who still believed Clara was worth listening to. Her face dropped mid-sentence. The interviewer asked if everything was all right. She smiled tightly, ended the stream early. I didn't need to see the footage. I got the text 15 minutes later. Clara, I hope you're proud of this. Clara, this will haunt you too. Is this revenge or closure? I didn't reply. It wasn't either. It was truth. But Clara wasn't the only one I had unfinished business with. I called Charles directly. It rang twice before his flustered assistant picked up. He's unavailable. Tell him this won't wait. 10 minutes later my phone rang. Charles Grant, every ounce of wounded pride in his voice. What the hell do you want? To give you a gift, I said. He laughed bitter. You serious? Deadly. Silence. The slow, arrogant inhale of a man trying to regain ground. I'm not interested in handouts, he muttered. It's not a handout. It's a warning. That got his attention. Go on. I know about the Cayman accounts, the blind trusts, the Venezuelan land deals, all tied to shell companies in your assistant's maiden name. And I know what you told Clara, about me. That I was unstable. That framing me was the only way to protect your name. You can't prove. I already did. The files are with the IRS and Interpol. But I left one thing out. That stopped him. What? The Boston waterfront project. I didn't include it. He exhaled like he'd been punched. That's leverage.
No, I said. That's mercy.
Why? Because I'm not like you. You mistook silence for weakness. But it was restraint. You don't deserve the full storm I could bring. There was a pause. Then something unexpected. You were never meant to be the enemy. You made me the enemy the moment you framed my love as a liability, I said. Now live with what you built. I hung up. That was the last time I spoke to Charles Grant. By week's end, the SEC froze their Boston project. Lorraine's foundation site vanished. Mason received a formal inquiry from the DOJ. Clara was dropped from 2 corporate boards.
And me?
I sat in a quiet cafe 2 blocks from my new office, sipping black coffee. No whispers. No stares. Just peace. Because sometimes the final nail isn't a hammer blow, it's a whisper. And sometimes it's enough to walk away. You'd think watching a dynasty fall would feel like fireworks. Loud. Spectacular. But it didn't. It felt like standing in a forest, hearing a rotted tree crack and fall under its own weight. I didn't need front row seats. The headlines did the work. SEC investigates Grant Holdings. Lorraine Grant's foundation faces scrutiny. Mason Grant tied to offshore accounts. Clara Grant Hale served divorce papers live on stream. Each headline chipped away at their carefully curated image. By the weekend, the dam broke. Turner called. They're trying to cut deals, he said. Of course they are. Charles wants to meet. Alone. No press. The irony almost made me laugh. Charles Grant asking for dignity. But I agreed. Not for him. For me. We met in a quiet conference room at the Ritz, the same place they once held a gala I wasn't allowed to attend. Charles walked in wearing a loose gray suit. He looked smaller. His pride was cracked. He sat down, placed his phone face down, and folded his hands. I'm not going to apologize, he said. Didn't expect you to. But I will say this, you played it better than I thought you could. I tilted my head. That was always the problem, Charles. You never thought I could. He nodded, no denial. Just the quiet acceptance of a man staring at the blueprint of his own downfall. I taught Clara to choose image over integrity. Taught Mason to lie with a smile. Told Lorraine to polish scandals until they sparkled. You married into the show. And I blamed you for not playing along. He paused. I thought I was protecting my family. No, I said. You were preserving a lie. Charles looked down, then back at me. I'll lose everything. You already did. He stood, pulled a silver key card from his pocket. Clara's idea. A backup estate in Vermont. Doubt she told you. She transferred it to your joint trust 3 months ago. Probably forgot. Don't worry, I'm not coming after it. He placed it on the table. I didn't touch it. I'm not here for souvenirs. He exhaled. I figured. I stood. He stayed seated like he needed something to hold on to. I gave him one last look, not sympathy. Not pity. Just closure. You were never the king, I said. You were just the curtain. And I walked away. Outside, the Boston sunset cast long shadows across the streets. I didn't rush. I walked like a man no longer being chased. Clara was waiting by my car. No designer clothes. No makeup. Just jeans and a sweater. For once, she looked like a person, not a portrait. You read the papers? I asked. I lived them, she said. We stood in silence. Heavier than any skyscraper her family built. I didn't come to beg, she said. Good. I was wrong, she said. I thought you were beneath us. That you'd never understand our world. I didn't realize you saw through it before I did. Maybe I always did, I said. But I loved you anyway. She blinked away tears. And now I love myself more. She nodded. Something broke in her, but she didn't collapse. And I respected her for that. You'll move on, she said. You'll become something bigger than this. I already am. I opened the car door. She didn't follow. I won't message you again. I know. Then she whispered what she'd probably wanted to say for years. I never saw you. No, I said. But I did. I got in the car. Drove away. No looking back. No soundtrack. No second guessing. Because when you burn down a lie, you don't stand in the ashes. You walk into clean air and breathe. It's been a year since I left that penthouse and the Grant family watched their illusion fall apart. A year since Clara dropped her wineglass, since Charles lost control, since Mason's smirk vanished and Lorraine's false empire began to rot. People ask what happened after. How I rebuilt. If I ever look back. I didn't need to rebuild. I wasn't broken. Just buried. There's a difference. I moved to Vermont. Quiet. Secluded. No reporters. No noise. Just me, a fireplace, and a story I hadn't planned to write. But one morning the words came, flowing like water through a cracked dam. I wrote the betrayals, the silence, the strength I found in the shadows. Not out of anger but clarity. I called the book, The Man They Tried to Erase. Not out of spite. Out of truth. Because the more they tried to erase me, the more permanent I became.
Thanks for listening. Share your opinion in comment section and also do like and subscribe to the channel.